Boss fights in video games are meant to provide the player with a proper challenge. However, sometimes you might have put hours into preparing and the boss is just not feeling it. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com and these are 10 video game bosses that defeated themselves. Number 10, Professor Nakayama, Borderlands 2. The Borderlands games are not above taking the absolute piss out of their own characters, and Professor Nakayama is certainly one of those poor unfortunate souls who was put on blast. See, the Professor serves as the primary antagonist of Borderlands 2's DLC, Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt. He's a mad scientist who uses his knowledge of bioengineering to mutate Pandora's fauna and use it for his own evil purposes, and throughout the course of the DLC, the players face off against several of his abominations before going toe-to-toe with the man himself. The only thing is, the scrawny old kook proves to be too incompetent to even start a proper boss fight. That's because when the players come to kill him, he tries to make a big speech about how he can still defeat them, but before he can finish, he trips over and falls down the stairs, breaking his neck in the process. And the best part about this sequence is that each time the character's head hits the stairs, his health bar depletes accordingly, indicating that the man's own clumsiness really did do all the work for you. Number 9, Sans Undertale. When people think of Sans in Undertale, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the near-impossible boss fight at the end of the Genocide run. What they might forget, though, is that Sans can also be fought at the very beginning of the game, and beating him is as easy as Sans is lazy. See, the fight can be triggered after peacefully defeating Sans' brother, Papyrus. When you visit Sans near his station at Snowdin, he will offer to capture you, as he is technically a sentinel and he has to at least try to do his job. Fighting Sans here, though, is completely different from doing it through the Genocide route. His attacks are just tiny singular bones that appear at the bottom of the screen, making it almost impossible to get hit by one, and the entire battle is just you making skeleton puns and Sans pretending to be a threat. Of course, if he were to actually try, well, you'd soon realize that your little pretend fight was actually just one dead Papyrus away from becoming your funeral. Number 8, Benny, Fallout New Vegas. Benny from Fallout New Vegas doesn't so much throw the fight for you as a bunch of others do on this list, but instead he helps you quietly dispose of him in the dumbest way possible. That's because when you meet him in the Tops Casino to find the Platinum Chip and get revenge for him shooting you in the head, Benny attempts to ease the situation by offering that you both work together, which of course is him just setting up an ambush that he won't appear at and have his guards attack you instead. But things don't have to go that way, and you can convince him to go alone with a fairly simple speech check. After this, Benny will take you to the suite just earnestly and then lock the doors, essentially leaving himself at your mercy. You don't have to stealthily assassinate him, you don't have to deal with his guards, you don't even have to worry about him running away. It is easy as pie, and let's not even talk about the option to snap his neck after sleeping with him, because yeah, having sex with a person you try to kill and shot in the head before is obviously a great idea. For a man who supposedly fooled the 200-year-old ruler of New Vegas, Benny sure seems to be pretty dumb when it comes to self-preservation. Number 7, Billy Midnight, Red Dead Redemption 2. One of the coolest elements of the Red Dead Redemption series is its portrayal of faded legends in the Wild West. We see that with Dutch's gang's decline in both Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, alongside the legendary gunslingers you can encounter in that second game, including Billy Midnight. See, Billy is one of the 5 mythical figures that the player needs to find for a writer and Wild West enthusiast called Theodore Levin. And this old duelist can be encountered on a train departing from Rhodes railway station, and when the player tries to speak to him, the paranoid Billy will immediately flee and start jumping on the train rooftops. After the player eventually corners him, because you gotta run out of train at some point, Billy will then try to duel them in an act of desperation, but hilariously, if you manage to miss the killing blow and instead disarm Billy, the gunslinger will drop his weapon but then immediately draw another one from his ankle holster. But here's the interesting thing, whereas other gunslingers will try to attack you with hidden weapons when you disarm them, Billy actually uses his to instead shoot himself in the head. Yeah, he must have really cared about his perfect kill streak. Number 6, SAREN Mass Effect. As far as throwing the fight goes, SAREN from the original Mass Effect does it in a surprisingly graceful way. Instead of clumsily causing his own demise or letting the player win due to sheer laziness, he instead sacrifices himself to honor the player for making the right decisions throughout the game. See, SAREN is a road spectre, spectres being the galaxy's finest soldiers and peacekeepers, who was brainwashed by Mass Effect's big bad, the Reapers. Being their puppet, he's indoctrinated into becoming a tool in their mission of total annihilation. And after a few confrontations with him, the player is eventually ushered into the final boss fight with the character, which actually doesn't have to be a boss fight at all. See, if the player's morality stats are high enough, they can actually convince SAREN to disobey the Reapers and see the ways in which he's being controlled and acting in the galaxy's worst interests. Eventually, he'll start to see your perspective and, briefly freeing his mind, use the time to shoot himself in the head. Unfortunately, you still have to fight his reanimated corpse a few seconds later, but hey, the real SAREN does do the job for you. Number 5, The Grey Prince, The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. In order to become the Arena Grand Champion in Oblivion, the player needs to defeat its current champion, a fella named the Grey Prince. This orc is a veteran who has never been defeated, and the duel with him is, unsurprisingly, a pretty tough challenge. But Oblivion is an RPG, so of course challenging him isn't the only way to complete the quest. That's because before challenging the Grey Prince to a duel, you can talk to him about his heritage. Here, the orc will instruct you to visit an old fortress to find proof of his noble lineage, but what you find instead is a vampire who turns out to be the Grey Prince's father. Revealing this information to the prince will cause him to have an existential crisis and spiral into depression. So, when the player challenges him to a duel afterward, he will actually just beg them to end his monstrous existence and pretty much throw himself at their blade. This is the easiest way to earn the title of Grand Champion for yourself, but then again, it might not be as easy to get over the guilt of crushing a good man's spirit like that. Number 4, The End, Metal Gear Solid 3. When it comes to boss fights, you can't deny Hideo Kojima's creativity. The fight with the End, famously in MGS3, is one of the most memorable moments in the entire series. You have to spend ages tracking and attacking the veteran sniper as he camouflages himself across a dense forest. All the while, he shoots at you from out of nowhere. The fight is a test of your willpower and patience, but if you're especially patient, it can actually be resolved for you automatically. See, if you wait a week without playing your save file or just cheat and alter your in-system clock, the End will famously just simply die of old age. Number 3, The Master, Fallout. Charisma is an incredibly useful attribute in the Fallout series, and pretty much any self-respecting RPG. It allows you to get out of messy situations with just your silver tongue and persuade anyone into doing your bidding. And hell, it works so well that in the original Fallout, it even lets you talk the main antagonist of the game into, you guessed it, killing himself for you. The mutated abomination known as the Master is the driving force behind the main conflict of the story. He's the creator of the FEV virus and wants to transform the entire wasteland into his very own super mutant army. And when the player finally gets to meet him at the end of the game, he tries to recruit the player into his ranks, and refusing him will just cause him to attack you. However, if your speech is strong enough, and it does have to be very strong, you can instead convince the Master that his vision of the world is flawed and his plans doomed to fail. Your words will then cause him to have an existential crisis, a theme on this list, followed by an electrical explosion that takes away his life. Number 2, Ceaseless Discharge, Dark Souls. The Dark Souls series features several bosses that can be easily disposed of with a few simple tricks. One of the more commonly discussed examples of this is the Taurus Demon, who can get tricked into jumping off the wall via a glitch, as can the Iron Golem later on in the same game. This tactic used in the Ceaseless Discharge boss from Dark Souls 1, however, is no cheese or trick. The giant fiery demon attacks you late on in the game and initially seems incredibly imposing, not just because of his size, but how difficult he is to hit and the massive fire damage that he causes. However, if you are fast enough to run towards the end of the map, you will prompt him to leap after you and actually fall off an edge. At this point, he will attempt to save himself from falling to his certain death by grabbing the ledge that you're on, which allows you to deal massive damage to his exposed hand and force him to let go. So yeah, who says Dark Souls was hard? Number 1, Teddy, Dead Rising 3. Thanks to their quirks and comedic personalities, the psychopaths in the Dead Rising games are easily the most memorable part of the series. And the ones in Dead Rising 3 are all actually based on the 7 deadly sins, and Sloth, also known as Teddy, certainly lives up to that name. Teddy, like many of us no doubt, is addicted to playing video games, but unlike us, he's so invested that he hasn't even realized the entire city that he's in has been overrun by zombies. So when the player visits his mansion to ask him for help, Teddy instead asks them to fetch some supplies for him, and then slaps a couple of drones on them when it turns out the player isn't one of his servants. After you destroy Teddy's expensive toys, you force your way back into his basement dwelling and prepare yourself for a boss fight with him. Except Teddy is just too lazy to fight you. As soon as you enter the room, the man freaks out, has a heart attack, and then dies in his chair. There's no health bars, no boss music, nothing, just a sad old man releasing gas from his dead body. So, that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any other boss fights that just completed themselves for you like this lot? And did you abuse any of the tactics here? And while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't, though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.